Hello, I'm James Rampton from the Centre for Strategy and Evaluation Services. We're a UK-based consultancy which, together with Chorus UK, was appointed to undertake an independent evaluation of the European Capitals of Culture 2014, that is, Riga and Umeå. The reason for our work is to enable the European Commission to report on the results of 2014 to the European Parliament and the European Council. And our work involved analysing data and documentation relating to Umeå 2014, twice visiting the city to witness events and also to interview the Umeå 2014 team and the other stakeholders. And we produced a report which is available from the European Commission on their website. At this point, I should also say I'm very grateful to Mayor Ron Mark, Frederick Lindegren, Albert Edmund and the rest of the Umeå 2014 team for their help and hospitality. No doubt many of you are familiar with what happened in Umeå during 2014, so for that reason I'll focus on those things that I think are most notable from the European perspective and that distinguish Umeå 2014 from other cities that have held the Capital of Culture title. So first I'll offer 4 successes. Our first success is the open source approach. In Umeå 2014, the open source approach meant that most of the experience and capacity was gained by cultural operators that will remain operating in Umeå beyond 2014. The open source approach allowed the cultural sector considerable opportunity to shape the programme in a way that was authentic, reflecting Umeå, its context and its character. On the whole, the cultural programme was not developed by outsiders that had been parachuted into the city for the year and then who left. At the same time, the open source approach represented a risk. Would a credible programme emerge from the city's cultural sector? Would the programme offer the necessary diversity and European dimension whilst also being coherent? We might suggest that the open source approach isn't appropriate for all cities. Perhaps only those with an openness to co-creation and with a capacity for international collaboration, and where there's also a context of trust and a tradition of consensus. A second success of Umeå 2014 that we might highlight is the presentation of Sami culture in the cultural programme. To base much of the overall Capital of Culture concept and its content on Sami culture made Umeå unique, but it created risks. Not everything worked perfectly, not everyone was satisfied with the Sami theme and the way it was articulated. Nonetheless, Sami culture was represented in the Capital of Culture for the first time, and perhaps for the first time at this scale in a European context, in any cultural programme. New capacity for creating and presenting Sami culture has been developed, and there's a new appreciation for Sami culture amongst audiences in Norrland and elsewhere. The local Sami organisations that actively participated appear to be growing in confidence and they plan to increase their activities. And moreover, the Capital of Culture has shown the scope for respecting a traditional indigenous culture, whilst also showing how it can fuse with other cultures in a very contemporary way. A third success we might highlight is the local ambition of Umeå. Umeå was one of the smallest cities and the most northerly to date to have hosted the Capital of Culture title. The fact that it won the nomination and implemented a successful programme is a considerable achievement. The geographical remoteness did not prevent this Capital of Culture from being innovative, contemporary and European. Umeå 2014 was no cultural backwater. This success can be credited to the ambitions of the local stakeholders, not only to be a successful capital, but to creatively redesign and remake their city as a centre of growth and as a cultural destination. Looking at the evidence, we can conclude that the Capital of Culture has made an important contribution to the fulfilment of this ambition. It's provided impetus to complete some important investments in cultural infrastructure, notably the Varven. It's generated international interest in the city as a cultural destination, and it's built capacity within the city's cultural sector. A fourth success we might highlight is the European added value. Whilst Umeå didn't need the Capital of Culture for the development of the city, we can see that incredible value was added by this European title. Local and national stakeholders made considerable additional funding available for culture during the title year, and the city gained an international profile from hosting the title that wouldn't have otherwise have enjoyed. There was also additional impetus to foster international collaborations such as those through the Corners Project and the Electra Opera in a larger scale than had been done before. We might also say that UMEO 2014 has enriched Europe's cultural sector and its offering, particularly by highlighting the Sami culture, but also by giving a prominence to various artists from other countries who were invited to perform or exhibit in UMEO and thus achieved greater international recognition. I'd like also to present a number of lessons learned from UMEO. These are lessons that would be of interest to other cities holding the title and therefore have a European perspective to them. A first lesson is about the potential for capitals of culture to contribute to a wider drive for culture-based development. The success of UMEO 2014 was very much dependent on it being part of a wider strategy for urban development. It wasn't the catalyst for the development of the city nor the end point. The city's cultural offering as it stands reflects decades of growth, and it's perhaps this growth that's enabled UMEO's cultural life to develop in this particular way, innovative, contemporary and outward-looking. Looking ahead, the legacy of UMEO 2014 will be both to contribute to the continued expansion of the city and to be dependent on it. A second lesson learned would be about the need for political support. Like all capitals of culture, the political dimension was present in UMEO in the setting of objectives, in the implementation and in the selection of projects. But it doesn't appear that the freedom to make artistic choices and to manage operations on a day-to-day basis was unduly limited. It would also appear that the political level offers stability, even if the operational arrangements were slightly uncertain in the early part of the development phase. We can highlight in particular the early approval of funds from the municipality and the willingness to make staff available. An important part of this stability was the cross-party support offered from the outset and also the continuity in the individual membership of the board. A third lesson we can highlight is the need to build a stable, effective team at an early stage in the development period. Ultimately, the governance of UMEO 2014 did work well, but it was relatively late in the development phase that the final team was formed, with many positions not filled until 2012 or even 2013. There was perhaps a need at the outset to look beyond the team that had been involved in the bid, and also to look beyond the municipality for the best recruits. Having the team in place at an earlier stage might have allowed earlier development of the content of the cultural programme, particularly some of the highlights. This would have facilitated international communication, for example to tour operators wanting to plan ahead for 2014, and also to the recruitment of sponsors, corporate sponsors, who would want to see what they're sponsoring and what the benefits to them would be. It would also have helped with relations with the local media, and the risk is that in a vacuum, local media will fill it with bad news stories. So having a few highlights in place would have given those good news stories to the local media and perhaps made things a bit easier in that early stage. A final lesson we might highlight is the limits to which international audiences can be directly reached by a capital of culture. Inevitably, a small city on Europe's periphery will face an enormous challenge in reaching an international audience. An expensive marketing campaign would very quickly exhaust the budget available. But UMEO built alliances with key players responsible for marketing the city and for marketing Sweden abroad, as well as with the Swedish embassies. This not only cut the costs of marketing, it facilitated links with international media, who then reported on the city and its cultural programme. Where it did invest resources, UMEO invested quite strategically and intelligently. For example, in the Court by UMEO tour of European cities and in the promotion of the opening ceremony. For example, the hospitality offered to the visiting journalists. These promotional activities were not cheap, but by reaching key targets, they undoubtedly provided a better return on expenditure than a conventional marketing campaign would have done. So I hope you found that helpful. That's just a few highlights of the summaries of the successes and the lessons learned, which we think are interesting from a European perspective. Our report is available on the European Commission website, and we would gladly answer any questions that you have. The team at UMEO 2014 have our contact details. So once again, I'd thank the team for your kindness and your hospitality, and I hope you find the report interesting. Thank you very much.